Thank you, David. Good evening, everybody. My name is Tim, and I am an alcoholic, sober through the grace of God in AA since October 13th, 2019. And for that, I am eternally and very, very grateful. I wished I had learned about this fellowship long before I did, but that was not the case for me. That's not part of my story. I came into this program after a long drinking career. I came in at the age of 53, but as has been pointed out to me, you're only late for your first AA meeting. So I've been on time almost since I came in the program. I've been asked to share my experience, strength, and hope with you tonight. And to that end, I will do my best and try not to bore you with drunk logs. And I'll give you some background on me, and we'll touch on my disease and how I came into this fellowship. And if I can wrap things up in 45 minutes, I'm going to try to talk a little bit about where I get my strength and my hope for you. So, who am I? Well, like I said, I've been sober since October of 2019. I'm currently 60 years old. I'm divorced, remarried to a wonderful woman, and have four children with my first wife. They're currently aged between 25 and 19. I'm an attorney. My first wife was also an attorney. After a year and a half of marriage, we started having babies. We had four of them in 5.5 years. All blessings, but a lot for two young parents, both of whom were working long hours at big firms, trying to make partners and impress clients. And I was married to my first wife for 12 years. And when we split up, our children were 10, 8, 6, and 4. And we agreed on 50-50 custody as we were both very close and involved in our children's lives. And we both considered each other very good parents. And that was the case right up until the time of my sober date. And I'll circle back to that later. I grew up in a beautiful all-American family. I'm one of seven children and the second oldest. I have six sisters and no brothers. That's right, six sisters. And I learned to put the toilet seat down very early in my life. And great family, beautiful parents. There's a 23-year spread between the oldest kid in my family and my youngest sister and my Irish mother. My dad was 100% Dutch. My mom was 100% Irish, and God bless her. She had babies in the 1950s, the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s when we all went to the same little Catholic school. And when my baby sister graduated from St. Lawrence Catholic School, my mother was recognized for attending parent-teacher conferences for 30 consecutive years. She was a saint, and she did a great job raising us. My dad was a cowboy. He's 6'5", leaned like barbed wire, size 16 cowboy boots, but the patience of a saint. And with all those girls, that was a good thing. And with a young, hyperactive kid like me, that was a very good thing. He was a fantastic husband, a great dad, my best friend, my best hunting buddy, my confidant. He was a horse whisperer. He just had this way about him. People were just drawn to my dad because he was so kind and gentle. And he died in 2003. And when he and my mom died, they were more in love than the day they got married in 1958. My mom passed away 12 years ago. And neither of my parents were heavy drinkers. Dad would have a glass of brandy every now and then, one, maybe two on special occasions. My mom would have a glass of wine at holiday meals and a half a beer on the 4th of July. But I made up for it from an early age, and I'll get to that. I'm a proud South Dakotan and born and raised, and I still own the family farm back there. And I grew up out in the country on the farm outside of a town of about 3,500 people. And I've bounced around the world. I've lived I started my college career up in North Dakota and then transferred to Minnesota and then spent some time in London and Boston and Atlanta and South Florida and eventually moved back to Minnesota in 1993 to go to law school. But whenever I would meet somebody and they would ask where I'm from, I would tell them South Dakota and I'd get two questions. And the first one, there are two things they would say. The first thing was, I've never met anybody from South Dakota before. And the second one would be, where is South Dakota? You know, and for those of you geography buffs, it's just south of North Dakota. So I was a pretty typical kid growing up in the country. We raised horses and hunting dogs, grew hay. The rest of the farm was leased out to ranchers and farmers, and my parents owned an ag supply company in town and a construction business, and they built architectural related buildings and machine sheds and grain storage units and silos and grain bins and stuff like this, and sold horse trailers and vet supplies and feed and seed and I was involved in the family business before my parents even wanted me to be involved in the family business. I was a hyperactive, undiagnosed, I'm sure ADHD kid. And I was selling the small bags of cat food to anybody that walked in the door at the age of 4. And there were a couple guys that bought cat food and they didn't even have cats. But I was at their side. My mom, we grew up in such a small, beautiful community, and there were a couple of retired bachelors that lived next door or worked next door. They owned the Sinclair gas station, and one of the brothers was the mechanic, and the other one was the ran the gas pumps and the service part of it. And my mom would give me 15 cents, a dime, and a nickel, and she'd send me across the street. And for a dime, I could get a Snicker bar, and for a nickel, I could get a bottle of Grape Crush. And that would get me out of her hair for an hour and a half. But I love being around my parents. Wherever my dad went, I wanted to be right on his heels, and it was great. And I graduated in a class of 96 students. I was a very good student, and I was an athlete, and I played every sport imaginable. And my parents were happy about that. That gave me place to burn off some energy, and uh, got to play football in college. Got to play some semi-pro football over in Europe, and I also one of my other big and favorite sports was rodeo, and I'll talk a little bit about that. It's part of the big part of my story, and but it sounds pretty idyllic, you know. Six sisters, we were all close, happy family, great community. You know, what the heck happened to me? You know, how did I get here? And well, I'm not really sure, but now I look back on myself and I did this the first time I went through the steps. You know, I started analyzing, you know, all the way back to my first childhood memories. And, you know, even though I was a good student and a good athlete, I had some undiagnosed issues. One, I was allergic to absolutely everything. I had all these food allergies. I was allergic to dairy, wheat, fruits, most vegetables, um, seafood. I grew up on beef, potatoes, and water, and did shots for years and years and years. Just and finally grew some tolerance, and now I only have a handful of allergies. But the other thing is that you know, there wasn't a therapist within 100 miles of where I grew up. And the only people that went to see therapists were people that were, you know, visibly insane or got in trouble with the law or something. And so I was completely undiagnosed. It wasn't even an option to find out, you know, why I behaved the way I did, but I was hyperactive and they used to call me motor mouth, and I had to be going all the time. And but the other issue that I had is that I had some strange anxiety and nervous issues. And even though I could carry myself with confidence, even as a young kid, I I would get so excited and so anxious about some of the silliest things. If my parents told me we were going to go to the Twin Cities to visit my cousins and they told me too soon, I'd work myself into a fever. I would vomit. I would have diarrhea. I would have a temperature. it got to the point where my parents would have to surprise me with things. I remember one time they told me we were going to go to this church about an hour away. And of course, I was like, oh God, why? You know? And then we pulled up, and all of a sudden there were these large animals I had never seen. There were giraffes and elephants and big tents. And I asked, can we come back and check this out when church is over? And my parents said, you know what? The circus might be in town. Maybe we should do that instead. That's how they had to handle me. And it really started to get pronounced when I started competing in sports competitively. Team sports were not so bad. Basketball, I'm out on the court with four other guys. Football, I'm out on the field with 11 other guys. But it was the individual sports. One winter, my parents just wanted to keep me as active as possible, so they signed me up for both wrestling and basketball. And wrestling was the most god awful thing for me. I would get so nervous and so anxious that I would throw up and I would have diarrhea before every match. I would shake. I hated it. But they didn't raise kids to quit things that they committed to. And so I was encouraged to get through the season. And at the end of the season, and it wasn't because I was getting beat up or anything. I ended up getting fourth in state in the 82-pound class in fourth grade. And after that match was over, my dad said, "Do you want to wrestle again?" And I broke down, and I said, "No, please don't make me." And he said, "No problem." I mean, can you imagine watching a kid go through that? you know what my parents did just to raise me. I'm so grateful, and I never had an appreciation for that until I got into this program and started reflecting back on my life. And so when I started to getting interested in girls, you become very self-aware, and I realized that I'm different than these other kids. Why am I so anxious? Why do I get so nervous? And at some point I told myself, I am going to conquer this. I am going to do whatever I can to get over my fears and my anxiety. And growing up in a cowboy community, I decided, you know what, I'm going to start rodeoing. And so I started calf roping, and next thing you know, I'm riding bareback broncs. And the bulls scared the hell out of me, and I thought this is a perfect opportunity for me to get over my fears. And so I started doing all three sports, and then eventually my horse wasn't fast enough for calf roping anymore, so I was just bareback bronc riding and bull riding. But when that time came, I would be back behind the chutes, throwing up, running to the outhouse. I was, but I was going to do it. And the moment after the ride, whether I'd get bucked off or make it to the 8-second whistle, it was euphoric. I had done it and I felt good. And then I started thinking about the next weekend, and all of that anxiety would build up. But I eventually got fairly good at this sport and started traveling around the Midwest and out west. I see some people from Montana on the screen. I was out there in Wyoming and North Dakota and South Dakota and Minnesota. And when you travel on the rodeo circuit, the same cowboys are at the same rodeos, it seems like, every weekend. And you get to know these guys. And I started competing with some of the pros. And there was this one pro, and he was really good, and he had made it to the national finals rodeo in Las Vegas, and he had sponsors, so he'd show up in a fancy truck and a beautiful horse trailer, and his girlfriend was a very attractive barrel racer, and he was it. I mean, he was something. I really looked up to him. I wanted to be him. And we were back behind the chutes. We drew two bulls, and we were going to ride back to back. And we were back there getting ready and putting on our chaps and our spurs and loosening up and stretching and all that stuff. And I see him reach into his gear bag, and he pulls out a bottle of Jack Daniels, and he opened it up and he took a couple gulps. And I remember the first reaction I had was this great feeling of disappointment. I can't believe this guy is drinking before he's going to ride. It was kind of like the way I felt when I found out Santa Claus wasn't real. And he saw me looking at him and he said, takes the edge off, gives me some courage. Want some? Yep, I do. I want some. And I remember that first swig of Jack Daniels, the bite that it had, but followed by that warm feeling that just comes over you. And all of a sudden, the edge is off. And I don't remember if I rode that bull or got bucked off, but it was the first time I climbed onto a bull when I wasn't scared to death. And from that point on, before bull riding, even in high school rodeos where alcohol is against the rules, I was sneaking Jack Daniels. I started drinking to manage my life. It was the elixir to help me manage my fears and my anxiety. And it didn't become a problem until in my 50s, but that was the elixir that made me comfortable, made me feel a part of instead of apart from. It made me feel good. It gave me confidence. And I went to college and played football, and alcohol is a big thing. Back in high school, living out in South Dakota, teenagers are driving around with cases of beer, slamming beers and throwing the empty cans out in the ditch. And that's how we grew up. So I was a drinker, but not a problem drinker. 15 years old, driving around country roads, not a problem. But I never got in trouble, and it was just commonplace. Our parents, my parents, they knew I was drinking, but they never said anything because I never got into trouble. And then I went to college, and that was fun. And then I got out of college and in the corporate world for 5 years before I went to law school. And I'm entertaining clients, and we're going out and we're drinking. And all of a sudden, alcohol is becoming part of my persona. It's not only my elixir in my clutch, it's part of who I am. Birthday presents, a bottle of nice Irish whiskey, a bottle of bourbon. People knew what I wanted. I was easy to buy for. And then I went to law school, got out of law school, and, as a young lawyer, what do you do when you win a case or you close a deal or you get a good result from a judge or a jury? You have a drink. What do you do when a deal goes bad or you get a bad result or a bad jury verdict? You have a drink. It became part of my personality. And I was in a miserable marriage, and it was loveless and sexless. And we were raising four little kids. They were 10, 8, 6, and 4 when we grew up, and working long hours and high pressure jobs. And alcohol was taking my edge off, you know. And then when we got divorced in 2010, it was Timmy time. I'm going to have some fun now. I don't have to go home to my wife. I've got my kids half the time every other weekend. I'm going to chase girls. I'm going to hang out with my buddies. We're going to party. We're going to travel. We're going to hunt. We're going to fish. We're going to have a great time. It was all about me, and I didn't give 2 cents about anybody else. It was all about me. And alcohol was a big part of it. And my drinking started ramping up. And even though I swore off ever getting married again, there was never going to be a second Mrs. Tim Peters. And I met a girl, and she changed my mind. And after 5.5 years, she convinced me that marriage might not be a bad idea. Matter of fact, she basically said, "Listen, we're going to get married." She had never been married. She had no children. She was beautiful, smart. And she said, "I'm not here just to date somebody long term." And I thought, I'm going to lose her if I don't get married. So we got married. And I loved her then. I did. But I wasn't really allowing myself to fully fall in love because I was so self-centered. It was all about me. I wasn't going to get hurt again. I wasn't going to open myself up to that. I was not going to be vulnerable. I love my wife today so much more than I did when we got married. And even though I loved her, but coming into this program has gotten us to a completely different level. And her dad was an alcoholic. She started Al-Anon as a kid. And she still attends the Rojo Al-Anon meeting almost weekly, which has been wonderful. But we got married. Life was good. We're gonna move into we bought a big house in the suburbs, and my kids love her and she loves my kids. And we closed on the house on June 29th, and things were good at the firm, and I needed another boat. Had two up at the cabin, but you know what? We need one here locally because the cabin's 2.5 hours away. So I bought this 33-foot boat out on the lake. Life was good. The maiden voyage, we had a blast. Two of my boys were scrapping. We had taken two cars there. So I decided I'll take one kid and she can take the other kids, and drove home, and I crossed the line and I got pulled over and I was arrested for driving under the influence with a .15 blood alcohol level with a 13-year-old kid in the car. And my family was right behind me. So they got to witness me, their dad and their fiance, being carted off to jail under arrest in handcuffs. That was awful. And when I got out, and I was so apologetic and I was so depressed and I was so mad and at myself, and how could I have let this happen, and what the heck, and now I got to go to court and I got to do all these things that the judge says I need to do, and one was go to drunk school, and I go to drunk school, and you see all these horrific stories and see these videos of drunk drivers killing people, and it's never the drunk that dies, it's always the innocent kids. And they talk about the recidivism of DUI offenders. And I'm like, I can't be this guy. This cannot happen to me. I do not want to go back to jail. I don't want to hurt anybody. I don't want to hurt myself. I've got four young kids. I gotta make a change. And I had an epiphany. I'm never going to drive drunk again. Uber. I'm gonna Uber. I was spending so much money on Ubers, and the fact is, my drinking went up. Now I can have not four drinks before I left for the party. I could have six. I could grab a to-go cup from the party and go home. My drinking damn near doubled, but I wasn't driving drunk. Good job, Tim. No more drunk driving for you. But things started catching up with me. I started gaining weight. My blood pressure was going through the roof. My labs were just outrageous. Give you an example. My triglyceride count, normal is under 150. Mine were at 1600. Okay. I was on 13 pills a day trying to control my triglycerides, my blood pressure, my cholesterol, the acid reflux. And, I'd go to the doctor and he'd take my labs and he's like, I can't figure it out, Tim. I'm looking at your chart here. You don't smoke. You say you don't eat many sweets. That's true. I'm a salt guy. I like chicken wings and French fries, popcorn. Um, and you only drink, what's this, two or three beers a week at the most. I can't figure it out you know you're fully medicated. We can't get your triglycerides down. I can't figure it. Why would I tell my doctor how much I was actually going to drink that week or had the week before? That goes into your record. That's permanent. I nobody needs, that's none of his business. You know what? Come on, doctor, give me more drugs. You know what? Double the dose. Let's get these triglycerides down. I was gaining weight. And then the blackout started. I was not a sloppy, fall down, stupid drunk. I wasn't that. Thank God. I, when I told my best drinking buddy that I was going to treatment, he said, I don't think I've ever seen you drunk. And I'm thinking, I don't think you've ever seen me sober. You know, I could handle myself pretty well. But all of a sudden, the blackouts started. Where did these come from? The first time I had 6, 8 drinks, that's nothing. and I had to get carted home. My wife couldn't even get me into the house. I was convinced somebody had slipped me a Mickey. I mean, there was no other explanation. My wife's a professional entertainer. So a week later, over concerts, and I'm sitting down and I had 4 drinks and I blacked out and passed out. And they had to send me home. She had to get off stage, take a break, put me in an Uber, and send me home. And as luck would have it, my oldest child, my daughter, I've got a daughter and 3 sons. She was home for her first weekend from college that weekend. So she called my daughter and my oldest son and said, "Hey, your dad's had a little too much to drink and he's in an Uber coming home and he may need some help getting into the house." And so obviously they met the Uber driver and it got me in and I started to wake up once I got into the house. And I, of course, was, very excited to see my daughter and wanted to talk to her. My son, senior in high school, varsity athlete, big, strong, strapping kid, bigger than I am. I'm 6'2". He's probably 6'4". And he had had enough. And he started yelling at me and tapping my chest and telling me to get my ass to bed. And I said, "No, I'm not going to bed. I want to talk to Olivia. Get to bed. Get to bed." One part of my past growing up out in South Dakota and being the cowboy that I was, there were a lot of scuffles, a lot of fights, a lot of fights in grade school. Kids don't fight anymore, but back when I was a kid, there was a fist fight at every recess. And I was never looking for fights, never did, but I got into a lot of scraps. And the one thing that I learned is that if there's going to be a scrap, throw the first punch. I threw the first punch. I took a swing at my 17-year-old son. I had never done anything like that to him or any of my kids before. I missed. I fell down. He jumped on top of me, called his 2 brothers, and the 3 of them held down while their sister videotaped the whole thing, and they kept me there until their mother and her new husband could come rescue the kids. That was my last drunk. I woke up the next morning not knowing what had happened, no recollection of it, seen the videos. And my ex-wife was threatening to have me arrested for assault. So I got the heck out of town. I drove up to my cabin and a buddy came up there with me to check on me and we talked and he said, "Maybe you should cut back a little bit." I'm like, "Yeah, maybe. But I'm not going to drink today." And that was something that I had told myself for months. I'm not going to drink today. I'm not going to go to the liquor store today. And I'd find myself dry heaving in the shower. And by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it's happy hour, and I'm stopping at the liquor store on the way home. And the next morning, I'm promising myself I'm not going to drink today. And I would do it all over again. And this happened for a good 2 years. But that day I was not going to drink again. And we went to dinner and I'm a wreck. I'm at my lowest. I'm at my bottom. My kids won't text me back. They won't answer my calls. My ex-wife's going to have me arrested. I don't know what happened the night before, but I know it wasn't good. I took a swing at my kid. I can't believe I did that. And we went to dinner and I had club soda. And then on the way home from dinner, the Minnesota Gophers football team was playing that night, and I can't remember who they were playing, but it was some Big Ten rivalry. And my buddy said, "Let's just stop into the bar here quick and watch the fourth quarter of the game." I said, "Okay." And of course, that bartender knew me. So, "Hey, Tim, what do you have?" And I had promised myself I wasn't going to drink, but I said, "I'll have a Jim Beam and club soda, please." I hated Jim Beam and I never drank mixed drinks. I don't know what got into me. The fact that those were my last 2 drinks of my career is disgusting to me. I wish I'd have gone out with some expensive Irish whiskey or something. But anyway, I had 2 Jim Beams and club soda and I blacked out. My buddy had to drive me home. 2. 6 drinks, 4 drinks, now 2 drinks, and I'm blacking out. The next morning I get up and I don't know what had happened. And for the first time since I was a little kid, I asked God for help. I had the first conversation that I have had with God since I was probably in second grade preparing for First Holy Communion. I recited prayers that the nuns and my parents made me memorize and never gave two thoughts to the words that were coming out of my mouth. It was just a matter of reciting prayers, and I had never talked to God, and I asked Him for help. And I told Him I didn't know what to do, and I needed help. God, help me. Please help me. And I can only say this in rooms like this with people like you because you might believe me, but I felt His presence come over me. And it came to me that I don't ever have to drink again. And I went home that night and I told my wife I don't have to drink again. And she said, call your uncle. And I called my uncle, and he was 18 years sober. And he said I should go to treatment. And she called her therapist, and her therapist said, you should go to treatment. And I'm like, I can't go to treatment. I run a law firm. I'm a busy, important guy. I can't just take that much time off. Well, after about 2 weeks of getting some really good advice, especially from my uncle who just passed away at 32 years sober this spring. Love him, miss him. He got me a room at this place called The Retreat in a suburb of Minneapolis. And he was a lawyer at 53 when he went into the program, just like I was. And he said, you can do it. We can figure this out. Your clients will be okay. Your employees will be okay. You got to do this. So I went into the retreat. And my wife was out of town. She was on tour the day that I went in. I was sober 2 weeks before I went into the retreat. And my college roommate agreed to come over. And you're not allowed to take your phone or your car out there. I mean, it's. So my buddy came and he picked me up. And while he was loading my bags into the trunk of his car, I thought, you know what? They talk about this 12-step thing, and I know a little bit about Alcoholics Anonymous. I watched The Sopranos, and I saw Christopher Moltisanti go to AA meetings. I know there's a lot of coffee drinking, a lot of cigarettes, and if you're lucky, you can find a pretty girl, get high, and get laid. So I think I know a thing or two about AA. But what are these 12 steps about? And so I Googled it. Up pops a PDF. I printed it off. I grabbed it off my printer. I jumped in my buddy's car and we started heading out to the retreat. And I'm going through this and I'm thinking, this looks pretty simple. I don't think I'm going to need 28 days for this. This seems pretty easy. If I like this program. I should be in and out of there. I should graduate early, you know. And I got there, and the next morning they have big book studies. They started at the beginning of the book, and they go through 164 pages, and then they go back to the beginning of the book. And so when you come in, you just start wherever they left off the week before. And I was thinking about this when the ninth step promises were being read earlier at the meeting. My first session, they read the ninth step promises, and I thought, what a crock. Are you kidding me? Is this when they come out and ask for the large financial contribution? I just want to learn how not to drink, and I don't want to die. And I know my health is such that, that's all I'm looking for. I don't need any of this other stuff. Just teach me how not to drink and stay alive, you know? And then we started working the steps, and I realized, I think I got step one. I admitted I was an alcoholic. I'm here, aren't I? And step two, I come to believe that a power greater than myself can restore me to sin. Why not? That sounds like a good idea. Let's get to the third. I made a decision, turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I. Wait a second. Huh. What? Make a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God that I don't even understand. I came here to get my control back. My problem was lack of control. And now you're asking me to give that up? I struggled. I struggled for 2 weeks on the third step. And they had the spiritual advisor at the retreat by the name of John McDougall, very respected. He's charged a lot of programs at Hazelden before he went to the retreat. Everybody loves this little prick. And I go in and I talk to him, and he's like, "When did you have your last drink?" And I said, "My sober date's October 13th, 2019." And he said, "You'll drink again." I said, "No, I won't." He's like, "Yeah, you'll drink again." I said, "No, I won't." "Yeah, you'll drink again." I'm like, "Listen here, you little leprechaun. No, I won't." And I got up and I left. That was the end of the session. And it took me about 3 days to cool down. They said, you got to go back and see McDougall. You got to get through this third step. So the next session was a little bit different. And he said, what's your struggle? I said, I came here to get control back, and I don't really understand God. So I don't know how you can ask me to become willing to turn my will and my life over to the care of something I don't understand. And he said, look at the first three words of the third step. Make the decision. Make the decision. You got to just make the decision. So I went back to my room and I made the decision. And then I got through the fourth step. And, at the retreat, they have these outside AA meetings come in. And, one of the questions they ask those guys is, those willing to be a sponsor, please raise your hand. And they kept telling me, you got to get a sponsor. You got to get a sponsor. You got to do your fifth step before you leave here, and you got to get a sponsor. And I'd see these guys, and I'm like, seriously? You want me to ask one of these losers to be my sponsor? Come on. I'm well educated. I'm fairly successful. These guys are losers. I was just looking at all the differences between them and me until one day when another meeting came in and we broke into small groups, and there was this big, good-looking guy, and I just by chance got paired up in his small group. His name's Benny. A lot of my Rojo buddies here know who Benny is. And Benny was a standout football player at the University of Michigan, and he was a second round draft pick to the Houston Texans, and he had a hell of a story. And we had a lot of similarities. And I thought, you know what? I like this guy. I'm going to ask him to be my sponsor if I could do my fifth step with him. And after I made that decision, he was my sponsor for about a week before he heard my fifth step, which I thought was going to take an hour or two. It took 2 days. And I started realizing how similar I am to all these guys that are coming in. And I started seeing myself in them. And all of a sudden, the things they were saying started resonating. And I opened my ears a little more. And I became a little less judgmental. And I started learning from these guys. My ego was starting to deflate, and I didn't even know it. And it was one of the neatest things. And so I got out of the retreat after 28 days, and then that's when the work really started. And Benny, big man, said, if you don't go to the Rojo meeting on Wednesday, I'm going to track you down and I'm going to kick your ass. And so, I'll be there, Benny. So I went to this Rojo meeting. I didn't know what Rojo was. And I walked in, and I was greeted by a handshake, followed by a couple of hugs. And within 15 minutes, I knew I had found my people. They were having an absolute ball. And they took me in and they welcomed me. And they were patient and they were kind and they were loving to each other and to everybody. And I wanted more. And they told me, you know what, you got to do 90 meetings in 90 days. I'm like, well, that's for the other guys. I'm a busy guy. I haven't worked in over a month. I got kids. I haven't talked to them. But I can't do 90 meetings in 90 days. But I told my wife I go to AA meetings and I like these Rojo guys. They meet twice a week. That should be good. And then we were traveling to Florida that winter and I pick up a couple meetings down there and I'll be damned. Those guys were a lot like the Rojo guys. You know, and then I go to another meeting down there and I'm like, these guys are pretty cool too. This is kind of fun. And then COVID hits in March of 2020 and I'm like, "Oh my God, I need my AA. You know, I'm addicted to AA. I need my AA. What is going to happen?" And all of a sudden, a couple of guys, Benny and Tommy Hoffman and a couple others, they said, we're gonna meet on Zoom." Well, what's Zoom? I've never heard of it. Well, have you ever heard of Skype? I'm like, yeah, I've heard of Skype. It's like that. In the first 3 months, I had gone to over in the first 3 months of the COVID shutdown, I had gone over to 100, over 115 AA meetings. And not a week goes by where I'm not on at least five, sometimes seven, sometimes more. And that has become such a big part. And the Rojo men, and a lot of them are here. And thanks, guys. I don't know if you come here every week or if you just came to support me, but I love seeing your faces and thanks for being here. And when I decided that I was going to stop drinking, I had resigned myself to the fact that I was going to give up all the fun in my life. It was over, and that was okay because I had some kids that I wanted to get reunited with, and I just didn't want to die. But I was okay not having any fun. I've had so much fun since getting sober and so much fun in AA. We've got groups of guys at Rojo. We go fishing in Louisiana. We go dirt biking out west. We go pheasant hunting to South Dakota. We go to retreats together down in that. Oh my God, I've never had so much fun. I fancied myself as a fisherman. I was never in the boat before noon because I was too hungover. Now when I got my 60-day medallion, they asked me to say a few words. And one thing that came to me was in the last 60 days, I have witnessed more sunrises than I have in the last 35 years. And I try not to miss a sunrise. That's part of my routine now, my morning meditation and prayers. Watch the sun come up, be grateful for it, you know? And this month, we've been talking a lot about the sixth step. And I was at a retreat in Nashville. A couple of my buddies on here were there with me, and one of the talks was the flyover steps, and it was about six and seven, 6 and 7. On the top of page 76, what are there? 4, 5 sentences, two small paragraphs on 6 and 7. You think, oh, this is easy. And the guy leading the talk, one of the guys leading the talk, Sheldon out of Las Vegas, wonderful guy, just amazing. And he said, he believes that there is so little said in the big book about 6 and 7 because that's what this whole program is about. That's what the whole book is about. 6 and 7, becoming willing, the willingness to have God remove these character defects and then asking him to do it. And how do we do that? We've got to be self-aware of what those character defects are. So we've got to do step 10. And then we go back to step 3 and we ask for God's will, that knowledge. And then we have the knowledge to identify the defects that we need to think about in step 6 and ask God to take away in step 7. And that has just been so enlightening for me. All these steps are magical in one way or another. But those two, they say it separates the men from the boys. I agree. I didn't know what that meant, but I agree. An AAer who has a good 6th and 7th step practice is idyllic, and I aspire to be that. And I've learned that from you and my Rojo boys and watching you, and I live in a life of gratitude. My wife taught me that. When COVID happened for her, her entire business shut down. There wasn't any entertainment. She lost her passion. She lost her financial means. And she started a gratitude journal. She said, I'm not going to be sad anymore. I'm going to start a gratitude journal. And she taught me how to be grateful. And she said, we're not going to be sad about the kids anymore. We can't. We're going to love them. We're going to wait for them to come back to us. And my life is darn near perfect in my mind, as good as it's ever been yet. The sad truth is that I have not seen my children or had any communication with them since that blackout the night I took a swing at my son, despite many, 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 many attempts and constant communication and cards. They're not ready. I've got an ex-wife that would rather see me face down in the gutter full of urine and vomit than happy and sober. My sponsor tells me they'll come around. It's been damn near 6 years, 7 years, and they haven't. But you know what? I can only sweep my own side of the street, and I've got a lot to be grateful for. And it's part of my story. And like we said in some of the early readings, we don't turn our back on our stories. They're an asset for us. And if I can help somebody else who's suffering with their kids being estranged or other people in their life being estranged, I can at least let them know there's hope and there's still a way to be grateful and happy despite those burdens and those sorrows. And my time is up. And I really appreciate you guys listening to my story. And thank you so much, David, for asking me to come. And all you Rojo knuckleheads, thanks for showing up.